Good morning, everybody. So, in the meantime, that it loads, hopefully, I'm Giacomo Zucco. I'm the founder of BHB Network and Blockchain Lab Switzerland consulting company. We do basically consulting, Bitcoin-related consulting for institutional players, banks, especially in Switzerland, especially. And we also have the BHB initiative, that is an initiative created to support and help and enable in any possible way the research and development on top of Bitcoin and standardizations efforts and cooperation efforts and whatnot. So, yeah, already did the presentation. So my talk today is about assets on Bitcoin. The subtitle is, yes, okay, financial sovereignty and crypto anarchy are cool, but what about those crypto kitties? So they are priority in life, right? So the topic of this presentation is how to issue non-Bitcoin assets, so assets that are not Bitcoin, are not like Bitcoin, on top of the Bitcoin protocol. And when I say on top, I mean a lot of possible options that I will try to clarify in this presentation. That is part review of past efforts in this regard, and part new proposals. I will also present a new humble proposal we are just launching to try to converge around some best practices and standards in the topic of the non-Bitcoin, Bitcoin-based assets. So your thoughts right now are in this order. I mean, I guess the thought of 99% of the people in the audience are these ones. Like the first is, if you have it, okay, we are hearing about Bitcoin-based assets since 2011. Bitcoin 2.0, very, very cool. But first, if you have a centralized issuer and redeemer of the rights associated with the asset, why the hell do you need decentralization at all for the transfer of the assets? If anything related to the content of that right is in the hands of the issuer, which is centralized by definition, then just use a database right? The issuer can use a database. The second objection is usually something like, even if you need some degree of decentralization, why do you have to build on top of something that have a very specific purpose and a lot of challenges to do good what it already does, so to be permissionless money? So why do we want to build on Bitcoin? Try to build some separate system for assets. Maybe you can do some optimization. Maybe you can be more free to experiment different stuff. For example, a side chain like confidential assets on Liquid that hit the news just yesterday is a solution which is different from Bitcoin itself, leveraging some parts. But one objection could be, just leave Bitcoin alone, please. We are not doing assets. Do something else, maybe somehow decentralized. The third objection is usually, even if you have some utility in piggybacking, in leveraging Bitcoin somehow, you shouldn't, maybe, because what you do may mess up with Bitcoin's scarce resources, which is basically block space and bandwidth, because you're going to use our blockchain for purposes that are not interesting for Bitcoin nodes. So there is people giving you bandwidth and storage for free, and you are abusing that to do something which is not directly related with the Bitcoin project itself. Or also messing up with incentives, like what if you are using this asset system to promote a scam coin which is somehow in competition with Bitcoin asset itself? Or what if your asset, even if it's different, supposing that your asset, well, I'm too short, so I will do this. Even if also so you can see Carlos Matos here. So even assuming that your asset is different from Bitcoin, is not a Bitcoin clone or a Bitcoin competitor, maybe the value of the assets will be more than the value of the market cap of Bitcoin itself, and that may screw up the incentive, may screw up the incentives in the long run, maybe with reward going down. I mean, it can be a problem. The last objection usually is, yeah, okay, cool, but this isn't a new idea at all. We already discussed this. We already tried this. There was a counterparty, Correct Coin project, a lot of efforts. They didn't work. They didn't get any traction. People is now doing CryptoKitties on Ethereum, and so why even bother to try something new or to discuss it again? So in the next minutes, I will try to address some, admittedly not all of these issues and these concerns, and I will try to convince you that it's a very good idea to put time, effort, skills, and money right now into a standard for non-Bitcoin assets on top of Bitcoin. Then I will fail miserably in convincing you of this, but you will not leave the room for the second part of the presentation, please, because I have some backup arguments for my thesis. So the first backup argument, I call it the vape pen argument. So I don't know who is smoking here. Smoking is bad, it's bad for health, you shouldn't smoke. But if you do, you should probably use the way which is less damaging possibly. So you should smoke in the way that limits the most the damages for your health. I actually smoke cigars, so I don't like vape pens. But anyway, it's a sound argument. So the second argument is the Jenga argument. If you play Jenga, when you build on top, then it's very, very hard for everybody, competitors, regulators, everybody, to try to remove the pieces on the bottom. So the more you build on top, the more difficult to change or to stop the base layer becomes. So even if the blocks that you put, well, this is a blockchain, right? Even if the blocks you put on top are not interesting, they are somehow reinforcing the stability and the immutability of the layer on the base. Let's consider this. This is a good example. So I like to compare scammy ICOs with .com bubble, with .com scams. So they were scammy enterprises like pet.com, a crazy bubble, a irrational market. But an interesting thing is that while internet itself had its protocol wars against scammy competitors like the ISO-OSI protocol, the history was that first there was the protocol war. The true, real, decentralized, cool protocol won the internet, and then we had the .com bubble on top of the internet. The question I would like to ask you is, do you think that the internet itself would be better off if the .com scam bubble was implemented on top of ISO-OSI instead of TCP/IP? That's so out of the comparison. Are you sure that the fact that now people is scamming people on top of Ethereum is a better thing for the Jenga effect than if people were scamming people on top of Bitcoin? That's not a rhetorical question. I really wonder in myself that. In a way, you are dissociating yourself from scams, so you are protecting your base layer from bad reputation, maybe a regulatory crackdown. But in a way, people is building scams on the internet and on Ethereum, and they are not building a lot of scams on top of Bitcoin. Yeah, they are, but for example, giveaways are always on Ethereum. That's annoying. So that's the Jenga. The Jenga argument is you should build stuff on top of Bitcoin, even if you're not convinced. You should let people build stuff on top of Bitcoin. Maybe don't help them, but don't necessarily stop them. The third argument is the permissionless stress test argument. So what if some of the things that you can build on top of Bitcoin, they do reinforce the base layer immutability, but they also crash the base layer because they are too heavy, they are unhygienic, they are not good for the protocol. So they are blotting the blockchain, they are reducing anonymity. So, well, in this case, the interesting thing about assets is that many proposals, like the proposal I will try to launch today, are permissionless. Not all the proposals involve a change in the Bitcoin protocol consensus layer. So many of these proposals can be launched anyway. So the thing is that you should also try to address this kind of initiative, this kind of uses. If people can leverage Bitcoin storage for free, free riding on top of that to do assets, then people will do that. Yes, you can try to evolve Bitcoin in order to make it difficult, but not forever. there will come a time in which Bitcoin will be kind of immutable at the base layer, and everything can be done on top of it, will be done on top of it. So it's interesting to analyze what things you can do in this regard. The fourth argument is the architectural experiment argument. So there are some experiments that involve architectures that are radically different from the Bitcoin's blockchain. You can think about Mimblewimble or Peter Todd's Proof Marshall architecture, so something which is radically different. So you cannot experiment that on Bitcoin now. Yeah, you can do tests, but you cannot experiment it in real game theory life with economic incentives on top. So you can create an altcoin, but that's a bad thing because you're creating a Bitcoin competitor, diluting the Bitcoin proposition. The best idea is to create an interoperable sidechain, of course, but short of that, the nice idea to experiment with assets is that you can experiment with new architecture that are not possible to try on Bitcoin directly today, on this kind of not Bitcoin, strictly not Bitcoin assets, so they are not necessarily competitor with Bitcoin, and then you can just vet the results. And we are going to do exactly that. Spoiler, the proposal that I'm going to present you today is based on the client-side validation idea of Peter Todd, and we are trying to use that on top of issued asset instead of Bitcoin, which is not trivial to do. The last argument is the strongest, and it's the Bruce Fenton argument. So the argument goes like this. We all love Bruce Fenton, right? Everybody in this room loves Bruce Fenton. So Bruce Fenton's tweet stream was very, very rich and various, like he was talking about gun rights and pollution, capitalism, a lot of interesting stuff. But then on March 23, he started to talk about tokenized security. And then again, basically every day, tokenizing, collectible, tokenized security, and he also issued a 100 Bitcoin bounty to demonstrate that you cannot do on a database what you can do on a blockchain with tokenized security. And then he started to publish memes about tokenized security. And then he started to publish videos on tokenized security, and then T0 and Ravencoin and other videos, and Ravencoin again. Comics, other videos, other memes. And his friends are not helping. They talk with him about securities, tokenized security. They invite him to security token conference. So basically, you cannot talk with Bruce about anything else, and we need to help him healing from his obsession. So please, let's do for him. Maybe it doesn't make sense, but we have to help him. So now I will try to expose, I will try to list some use cases that I think make sense on top of the decentralized network and possibly on top of Bitcoin itself, and I will try later to clarify what I mean with on top. The first idea that makes sense on a decentralized system about assets is an asset which is completely independent from the issuer. Of course, no asset can be independent from the issuer at the beginning. Even Bitcoin is not independent from Satoshi Nakamoto in the Genesis block. But then, everything that happens to the asset after the issuance moment, will, including its value and the perception of its value by the market, will be completely independent by the issuer. The issuer cannot touch it, cannot redeem it anyhow. So, of course, what people think about asset independence is mostly science fiction, things like DAO organizations, and but these are very, very difficult to do, not really realistic right now, but in principle, you can think of something like that. This could make sense. For example, I create some kind, not now, but maybe in 5 years, I have some kind of technology that allows me to create a betting game on top of Bitcoin, completely decentralized and trustless. And the creator of the game, of course, he takes some fee because he created the game, Ethereum contract-like. And then he says that if you pay some amount of Bitcoin, he will use this amount of Bitcoin, first to buy his Lambo, but then to promote the betting contract, and he will give back a percentage of the fees to everybody pro quota to everybody that gave the Bitcoin. So some kind of illegal securities, some kind of illegal is paralegal securities and royalties and equities. So crypto equities, black market, gray market, stock market. That's cool. It's not realistic, but I don't think that we should rule out this possibility in the long run at all. You can have, for example, Kickstarter-like all or nothing contracts that give you, there are arguments about total asset independence. Then there is the argument about asset transparency. Asset transparency basically is, yes, you still have to trust me somehow, or you still have to rely on something which is centralized. For example, I issue stocks, regulated stocks on the stock market, but you are afraid that I will manipulate the total supply, or I will manipulate the ownership states of the assets, and you want to be sure that I can't, because I am committing technologically to the total supply or to the distribution model right now. So this transparency can be useful in two ways. One way is because maybe regulators if you are a stock market, why should you use a blockchain? The main costs are not technical, they are legal. And the regulator is not going to give you a break from compliance just because you're using a blockchain right now. But maybe in 10 years, if you prove that you cannot inflate the supply, then you will have, or you cannot modify the past trade, then you will have some kind of regulatory exemption of some kind. I don't know. Then there is asset blindness. I think this is very, very interesting. So assume that you are issuing a regulated asset on top of a protocol, and your issuing activity is completely following KYC, AML, SEC guidance. You are not selling to unqualified investor. You are not selling to anonymous people. You require KYC to issue and to redeem. But because of how the protocol is built, people can actually, without you even knowing it, trade this asset on a secondary market that cannot directly redeem. So just to make you example, if you give me $1 to this bank account, I will give you a dollar equivalent asset on a blockchain. I am only serving KYC customers, but then these KYC customers can trade this stuff permissionlessly on a black secondary market, gray, which is better, secondary market, and then somebody else, which is already registered, can come back to redeem the dollar. Of course, this is completely centralized and trust-based, but it has an utility, basically providing a plausible deniability for the issuer instead of having to admit they are actively enabling a black market. The last possibility is just standardness. So people right now is maybe chatting in this room, this presentation is scam, and you are writing that on Telegram or Signal. You are using the internet, so you're using the Wi-Fi of this conference center to go to some switch somewhere in the world to get back on 4G on a cell phone. That doesn't make any sense technologically speaking. You should use a proximity communication. You are abusing an open network. But there are good reasons to do that, because this open network is so widespread and so established for open communication that even for closed communication, you are just piggybacking it because you are just externalizing your costs. So you have to build a company portal, a closed permissioned company portal. You are going to build it in 1992. You don't use TCP/IP. That doesn't make any sense. TCP/IP for open communication. You use a mainframe. But you're going to create a company portal in 2018. You do use the internet, and then you close the internet because you're just, it's easy. You're reusing code-based tools, library, habits from the users, infrastructure. So after Bitcoin, after hyper-Bitcoinization, there will be a lot of reasons to use Bitcoin standards and code to reuse every part of Bitcoin that you can reuse, even for permissioned, centralized, trust-based system. Of course, the nice thing is that the third use case can, I will give you some example. So the first example is smart rights, right? So I give you something that in an independent way, trustlessly, will give you access to some money on the blockchain. So, for example, crypto royalties for a betting contract on the blockchain. Then probably honest rights. There is something which is halfway, but I think it's an honest use case, which is basically digital collectibles. So when you have digital collectibles, in a way, the life of the collectibles is independent from the issuer. Once an artist created the digital collectibles and he issued it on the blockchain, and you just can check the scarcity, so you only need transparency to make sure that the limitation, the supply is really limited, then you don't really need an active involvement by the artist or the company itself. The artist could die, so his server could be shut down, and the company could fail, and the company's service could be shut down, and still this collectible could be traded for 10, 20, 40 years. I mean, if the Beanie Baby company shut down, you still trade Beanie Babies on eBay. And that's something that has an utility. So to decouple the issuer, the technology infrastructure of the issuer from an independent transmission protocol that can be used to transfer and to check the total supply. Another example could be about asset standardness, whatever. So many clients come to our consultancy company, they want to issue asset, and they ask me, should I use ERC20? And I say, no, it's a scam. I mean, it's not private, not scalable. Ethereum will just crash down soon enough. So don't do it. So what I should use? Well, you should create your own database system. Oh, so I have I have to select a stack, I have to bootstrap a database system, I have to maybe code something. Why? I can just install an Ethereum node. I cannot sync it, but I can install it. And then I can issue on top of that, leveraging other people's resources. So why shouldn't I? It's standard. If I create a token, if I am Starbucks, and I create the Starbucks point, on my system, I have to make sure that people will download the Starbucks app. If I do that on ERC20, every dumb person that have a Ethereum wallet will use its Ethereum wallet in order to transfer the Starbucks point. So there is a point in interoperability and standardness itself, even if it's not meaningful technologically. And the nice thing is that any kind of regulated right, like the fiat Bitcoin example I gave before, can actually pretend with the regulator to use this standard, not because he's enabling a secondary black market, but because he's doing that for interoperability, because it's a standard, or because of transparency. So it's even pro-regulator approach. I mean, I'm using the blockchain not because I want liquidity from the black market. I use the blockchain because I want to be transparent, which sounds good. So I will use 10 minutes to give a review of past attempts to try to issue tokens on top of Bitcoin. So the first one is asset-specific alt chains. So basically, for every asset that you want to issue, you copy Bitcoin and you call it Zuccoin, and you bootstrap it. This was this was the standard in 2011, 2012, first scam coin environment, when people started to issue any kind of asset representing things. There were a lot of gold-based altcoin where people were just copying Bitcoin, bootstrapping it. This has a lot of problems. The first problem is that you need to bootstrap everything from scratch for every single asset, so it sucks. Also, to reach the minimal thresholds for hash rate, for security, and review and maintenance by coders is basically impossible. So there is no current approach. Also, the issuance policy is often incompatible with mining incentives. So if I am Apple, I'm creating an Apple blockchain in order to issue Apple stocks. And I cannot have a fixed supply because I cannot follow the miner incentives. I have to follow my own security-related policy. So it doesn't work. Then people started to use to propose a single asset-enabled alt chain. So instead of creating a new copy of Bitcoin for every asset, I just create one clone of Bitcoin, and I will make it asset-enabled. So I have to bootstrap the hashing power and the code and let's say the coder mind share just once. And if I can do that, I can issue several assets on top of that. This is basically Ethereum, or is also the new fixation of Bruce, Ravencoin. So you launch a Bitcoin clone with a scam coin once, and then you leverage that. The main problems are, well, there are a lot of problems. You still have to bootstrap from scratch, but just once. You are still difficult to reach the main hash rate and review maintenance threshold. You cannot reach real decentralization on the project. That project will remain centralized around Vitaly Buterin or whatever. You have very, very high incentives for scammers, because if you are trying to bootstrap from scrap a new digital gold, then that's like a honeypot for scammers that will try to profit from these new bootstrap of digital gold scam coins. Also, you have a very, very reduced privacy, because for example, on Ethereum ERC20, the anonymity set for Ethereum user is already pretty small, because its account base is trivial to de-anonymize Ethereum users. But to de-anonymize an ERC20 token user is even more trivial, because the anonymity set of people using that specific token, that's true also for colored coin. So anonymity on Bitcoin sucks. Anonymity on colored coin is terrible, because basically how many people is trading that exact asset? So chain analysis with colored coin is basically giving away any kind of privacy. So there is another step, which is an asset-enabled sidechain. Instead of just recreating a Bitcoin clone, a scam coin, I create a chain that can allow for asset, but is reusing Bitcoin. This is the original sidechain concept, in which you are basically reusing the Bitcoin hash rate with merge mining, and you're reusing the Bitcoin asset with two-way pegging, for example, SPV-based two-way pegging. These are still, this original approach. I'm mentioning Bit Asset Drive Chain, a proposal by Paul Stork, which was here somewhere. Just a few weeks ago, he proposed a asset-based side chain. But you have some problems. First, you have to modify Bitcoin in order to launch this kind of side chain. Second, you still have reduced privacy. You have reduced security, because there are a lot of discussion about hash rate on the side chain. So there are a lot of security considerations. Actually, I'm quoting also confidential asset over Liquid, but there are some caveat here, because Liquid is doing something different. It's a federated model, so it doesn't have any problem with changing Bitcoin anyhow. And it doesn't have any problem with privacy, as you can see from the star, because privacy on confidential assets is reached using confidential assets. So basically, cryptography on top of transaction, where your anonymity set gets back to be the one of the total supply of tokens on the platform. So I'm exposing past attempts, so I'm not really analyzing Liquid now. Actually, I will admit that if Liquid works as intended, in practical, if everybody can use a Liquid confidential asset to issue assets, probably an on-chain protocol gets practically redundant. At least it can be used as a security measure against censorship on the side chain, which is of course easier than the main chain. Then we go to asset-enabled meta chain. So meta chain means that instead of creating another chain, I will just use Bitcoin transaction to store some metadata that are parsed and understood from a meta protocol as asset passage system. So these are the typical omni or counterparty strategy to do assets. A lot of problems here. The main problem, you still have very, very low privacy. Also, the main problem here is that you are fighting with Bitcoin over scarce resources. So your counterparty, you want op return to be larger, you want to use bare multisig to store data. The Bitcoin nodes owners, they don't want you to do that. You have a strict conflict of interest between people that want to use the Bitcoin free resources to store and transmit assets, and then you have on the other side Bitcoin that wants to minimize the free riding over full node resources. So this is the first problem. The second problem is no SPV. I know no SPV. What we're using now is not SPV. Call it lightweight nodes. You cannot do lightweight nodes with meta chains, because from the last transaction alone, you cannot check that, because miners are not enforcing the meta protocol rules. So they can put meta protocol invalid transaction inside a protocol valid transaction. So you cannot use hash rate at all, Merkle trees inside the block. You cannot leverage that at all. Another very relevant problem is that these protocols are using a scam coin. So you have a counterparty coin. Some caveat, because the counterparty guys didn't do an ICO, they did a proof of burn, which is kind of more honest, but still you have a scam coin there, which interests are basically incompatible with Bitcoin's interest. And also the fight over scarce resources also creates a problem, for example, for metadata. So rare papers, we all love rare papers, right? The collectible cards about cake and so on. But you have to know that the image of the card, over the collectible card, is not itself on the blockchain, because there is no space for it. There is just a commitment for it, but then you have to store in a rare paper directory the image. Even CryptoKitties are not decentralized. There is a centralized party storing the metadata for CryptoKitties. So it doesn't work very well. I'm almost finished with this review. Correct coin protocols, they reuse. You can do an easier pseudo SPV model, because in the case of counterparty or Omni, in order to check the transaction, you have to download all the transaction by all the possible blocks in order to check double spends. While with the correct coin, you only have to check every kind of transaction before your own in the same asset, and every kind of side transaction, in order to be sure that you don't have double spend. So you can implement pseudo SPV like Colu created a BitTorrent-based pseudo SPV model. So also you don't have a scam coin, which is good, but you still have all the other problems. So the last idea is assets directly in Bitcoin consensus. Yeah, not going to happen, so it's useless to discuss it. And so there is another idea that was first proposed by Peter Todd when he was working on smart coloring, I think almost a couple of years ago, which is basically client-side validation, an idea that Peters would like to apply to, would like to experiment on Bitcoin itself, but applied on issued assets. So the idea of client-side validation is that basically you do not use the blockchain to store the metadata and the proof of transmission for the assets. You only use the blockchain as an anti-double spending structure. You pass the proofs of the transmission of the assets off-band. So I give you an invoice. In this invoice, I don't just give you my address. I also give you a way to send me a proof. This proof will contain all the previous proof, and you will also relate to some Bitcoin transaction, so some Bitcoin UTXO that will be spent in order to close the seal around this proof. So I know that you are not double spending me, and I can do that with solving a lot of problems. So no scam coin, no fight over scarce resources. Still, there is a better privacy, because now the privacy is nobody can look at the blockchain and see everybody moving every kind of asset. They have to be participant in an exchange in order to be able to track only the previous path of the asset from the issuance to themselves. So there is something better. Now an argument about the fact that now it could be a good time to start a new effort about main chain Bitcoin-based assets. So first thing, there is a new design to try. People still didn't try to launch client-side validation based assets. We should try, even just to validate the challenges of this kind of design. There are a lot of challenges, like how to pass proofs. Also, there is a new market pressure. People is using scammy blockchains to issue assets. It's happening. So I personally want to give to my clients a better alternative to do stuff, which can be used tomorrow, 2 weeks. And then also, I'm running late, so I probably will not go very in depth about this, but there is Segwit now, and there is a Lightning Network, which were not around when the first correct coin protocol were designed by Alex Mizrachi and other people, and that changes the game a little bit. So what we are proposing now with the RGB experiment is a client-side validation style design, with a possible future-proof Marshall integration, which is what Peter was talking about yesterday, still super work in progress, and with a with a native lighting integration that can be used not just to color channels, but also to use a colored routing, leveraging Bitcoin liquidity. Now we'll explain what I mean. Also, we are leveraging a lot of stuff from Lightning Network because basically Lightning Network already requires an independent backup of the updates. So the pain that you have with client-side validation, which is I have to store my proofs separately from the seed, you also have that pain in Lightning Network. Also, you have to exchange proofs, you have to exchange updates on a peer-to-peer channel, so you need to establish a new peer-to-peer communication, which is especially painful for offline communication. So I cannot pay you with Lightning when you are offline, because I need to send updates somewhere, and where it is, so we have the same problem of Lightning. And we can leverage Lightning solution and the other way around. And also there are, and this stuff is compatible with L2, hopefully, and AMP. We tried some experiment, it should be compatible. We are using pay-to-contract commitments, so we are not using op return, which is easy to spot and it's expensive. So we are basically malleating the one address to put the commitment to the proof inside that address, and we are using the amount in another address to indicate which output is contained in the commitment. It's an open source, no profit, tokenless, so there will not be any RGB token. I mean, if we are successful, there will be one, but not from us, or somebody will try to do it. And very community approach, very community oriented, and a cool logo that you can see. So I'm running very, very late, so I try to, how much time do we have, Kevin? Okay, I'm 40 minutes late. So this is one kind of issuance, which is basically the issuance of a collectible. I cannot go into details, but maybe if you're interested, I will do a YouTube video about that eventually. So you issue a single asset, which is unfungible, like a collectible, and then you can trade it. There is another contract model, which is basically people pay pay Bitcoin to an address in a certain amount of time, and that payment is itself the origin of the asset, which is basically a token sale scam. And there is a third kind of contract, which is basically people, the origin of the asset is an UTXO on Bitcoin. So this is basically an airdrop scam. I will go very fast about on-chain token transfer. On-chain token transfer is you give me, Bob gives Alice an invoice containing also an indication for an offline server. Alice gives Bob the proof and commits the proof, closing a seal on a Bitcoin UTXO. There is also the Lightning version, where you basically create a Lightning channel colored with the token, and then you transmit the token with zero fee and with very good privacy, and you don't even need a server here. This is very, very cool. So if Alice want to pay Erin, and they have a Lightning path between them, but they don't have a Lightning path colored with that specific asset. So they want to send Zuccoin from Alice to Erin, but they don't have a Zuccoin liquid path. They can basically exchange the proof with Bob, which has a colored channel with Alice, which will pass TLC Bitcoin to Carol, that will pass a Bitcoin Lightning transaction to Dan, conditioned to a Zuccoin transaction to Erin. So basically, using a modification of the Bolt protocol in which the nodes will not only publish their fees, but they will also publish their market rate between the colored asset and the Bitcoin, you can actually create some sort of decentralized exchange on top of Bolt. There is a conceptual way to use this in order to exchange your token with Bitcoin or vice versa, using the Lightning Network, of course the RGB compatible Lightning Network, as a DEX, and giving yourself the token in exchange trustlessly. I don't have time to go in depth. And then there is a proof Marshall part, and I have no idea how it works, and you should just ask this guy. But also, if you were not sleeping yesterday, you should have some hint of how it works. But I pretend to know, but I don't know. What we want, just that people start to take seriously this topic right now, and you start criticizing this idea. You help us finalizing the specification. So we had a Python proof of concept working about this function that I showed you, but we deleted it, and now we want to recreate the specification from scratch. Well done, and recreate all the software in Rust. Aleko Sfilini, which is there, you can recognize it from the hire. He is the repository main developer right now, and you can ask him about any kind of information. We will first finalize the specification, and then we will do the production code. I will go around asking for donation to do this stuff to my clients. I'm not asking for donations now, so what I want from the Bitcoin community, if possible, is some challenge, some interest, some criticism, or some PR, hopefully. And I will look for money in the circle of my clients. About specification, this is the repository. Right now you can find this specification inside the repository specification. The first is an introduction, basically repeating what I said today in the presentation. Then there is the RGB color kernel itself, which is managing the pay-to-contract and the proof templates and so on. There is some Rust code for this, but first we want to finish the specification. RGB is clearly still a color coin relic. Like we called it RGB when we were working on Correct Coin, and now we didn't change the name because we kind of like it, but it's not anymore a strictly speaking Correct Coin application. Then there is the server, trustless server, the thing that you need to put the proof temporarily. It has to work on Tor. It has to use the BIP 157, 158 filtering to make it easier to download it. Yeah, I know. Okay. Well, so just one thing which is very important. The original name for this part was Rainbow, but that sounded too much Ethereum-like. So we are calling it Bifrost. Look at it. It is a Viking. So for sure is carnivore. And there are some futuristic ideas, but I will just finish with an important announcement. I'm giving away the